Welcome to the Great Victorian Fish Count celebration, or the Night of Nights, as we like to call it, for the Great Victorian Fish Count. It's hosted by the Victorian National Parks Association, in case you can't see the slide that's right there in front of you. We're an organisation that's been around. Actually, I have notes, so I'm going to follow them. My name is Kade. It's usually the first thing I forget every time I do a presentation. And I've been working at the Victorian National Parks for 10 years now, and I believe this is going to be my 10th Great Victorian Fish Count that I've had the pleasure of being involved in. Um, we've got myself talking at the end. We're going to have Jackie Myers from RMIT talking first about, I guess, the things that we don't see in Port Phillip Bay. We all know, and there was even an article in the paper today around the cleanest and dirtiest beaches. We all know there's stuff lurking in the water that's not good for us, but do we really know what's in there? So Jackie's going to dive into that. And then we've got Joel going to another place that we don't really get to see, which is sort of beyond that 40 meters dive zone, which is a bit deeper than we usually spend our time. Um, I'm joining from Bunurong land. I live on Malau or Phillip Island. It's a place that I am becoming more and more connected to as I get to spend more time here, living with my family and bringing up my son at this place and spending a lot of time in the outdoor environment, because basically there's nothing else to do on Phillip Island except for go outside, to be honest. I'm sure all of you are aware of the lands that you're on, and you all have a deep connection to it. And whether it's the land that you're on and where you live, or it's the sea country that you go and explore at, it is something that we've been, we're very fortunate to be a part of learning about it. And with recent talks with the Bunurong Land Council is that they're starting to learn more themselves. And there's this great opportunity for all of us to have this knowledge exchange where we're starting to learn a little bit more, but also learn from people who have been around and have actually, pretty much walked across Port Phillip Bay once upon a time and still have those stories to tell us. Uh, VMPA have been around for about 70 years, as the slide says. We're a very small, not-for-profit, run on the smell of an oily rag that is... Ah, my slides aren't flicking through, so just give me a second. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. There we go. So, as I mentioned, independent, membership based. We're a not for profit, so it means that we can basically say what we like. We've been around for, as I said, over 70 years, and part of that mission was to get parks and protected areas in Victoria in the first place, and campaigned hard for that. And part of what we do now is, well, trying to get more in, but also making sure the ones that we've got are well looked after. And so our supporters and members, and if you are a supporter or a member and you're online, thank you so much for helping us do that work. And the other thing that we do is we get people out to connect to their local environment. It's a big part of what we do. You can't get that appreciation, that nurtureship, that connection, unless people have opportunities to get out there. And as you'll see tonight, there's still so much we don't know, and it can be quite daunting to start to discover these places. So part of what we do is run a whole lot of events to get people out and get people on board. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to introduce our next guest. I'm recovering or midway through a massive chest infection, so I didn't do much homework today in the lead up to this. So I'm going to tell you about Jackie Myers, who I had the pleasure of meeting probably over about 15, 18 years ago. Even further than that. Oh my God, over 20 years ago. And it's one of those people that I bump into occasionally in random places like citizen science conferences or Australian Marine Science Association conferences. But it's one of those joys where, it feels like we're only talking a couple of years ago. And then we start to talk about all the stuff we've done since then. And we realize it has been quite a while. Jackie's a mad keen kite surfer, although she won't be doing much of that for the near future, but has been working at RMIT for quite some time. And I've always been fascinated when I talk to her about her depth of knowledge about stuff that I know nothing about. And if you'll get I don't know, you'll get the idea that tonight is basically about me inviting on people that I know, but also trying to pick the brains of people that I know are a hell of a lot smarter than me and know about a lot of stuff that I don't. So, Jackie, before I introduce you, I had notes and I didn't look at them. So, I have one more thing to do. So, those of you who are there listening, this is a webinar. means that we can't see you, so you can be wearing, doing whatever the hell you like. That is absolutely fine. You can see us. You can interact with us though. We have a Q&A, which you can put your questions in for the speakers as they're speaking. I believe we've also got like a vote up button. So if someone's asked a great question, you can vote it up. But we also have a chat option there, so we can all basically jump in and have a chat. And I wanted to see if people are able to use the chat by asking a simple question and sharing a story of what is it, I guess, this summer or in the next year or so you would like to see when you're snorkeling? The theme for this year's fish count is close to home. And part of that is we have so much still close to home in Victoria that we don't know much about. And one of the things I've always wanted to see, and I know they're around, is a ghost shark or elephant fish. I live Western Port, sort of at my back door. I know they come in to breed over autumn, I think it is, to put the eggs in the sediments. But I've seen the eggs washed up everywhere, but I've never seen one in the water. So it's on my hit list of things I would like to see. So while you're sitting there, and just before I get Jackie in, if you feel like it, please share something you would like to see in Victoria. And if you've seen it, maybe you can leave a note and let someone know where to go find it. So without any further ado, I'm sorry that I cut your introduction off, Jackie. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Jackie Myers.
All right, thanks, Kade. I'll just share my screen and then hopefully you can let me know that you can all see it.
Yep.
Yep, great. So thanks for that introduction, Kade. We have known each other for quite a long time. Um, I am based at RMIT University with the Aquatic Environmental Stress Research Group, and my background is as a aquatic ecotoxicologist. And tonight, I'm really excited to introduce you all to a fairly new project that we have, which is focused on examining contaminant trends and their potential risks in our estuaries and bays. Now, before I do get into my presentation, I do want to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands and waters where this project does take place. And I recognise their enduring connection to and care for these environments over countless generations. I'd also like to extend my appreciation out to the many researchers, industry partners, community groups, and the dedicated volunteers that contribute to this project and make it all possible. So tonight, I'd like to begin by introducing you to the concept of contaminants. Now, these are substances that are either man-made or naturally occurring that become contaminants when they end up in places they shouldn't be, such as our waterways, or when they are present at levels that could pose a risk to human or environmental health. Now, contaminants originate from the thousands of chemicals produced and used in our everyday lives, with many new chemicals continually being developed. Now, any of these can make their way into our waterways, and that's where they then become contaminants. And some examples of those are what I've got listed here. So things like pesticides, heavy metals, PFAS, and also things like excess nutrients. Now, contaminants, as Kade also mentioned, are often an unseen threat. So we can't always detect them with the naked eye. And unlike more obvious pollution, such as things like oil spills, which we can see, or surfactant foams, most contaminant pollution really goes unnoticed. And in this slide, what I've got here are some examples of some of our samplers that have been deployed out in the water. And at first glance, you might kind of look at them and you might assume that one that's on the left that's really heavily biofouled, it's covered in barnacles, comes from maybe a dirtier or more contaminated site, compared to that really clean looking one on the right. However, this biofouling could actually indicate that local species are really thriving in that environment and they're able to colonize the area, while the clean sampler kind of suggests that there might be something going on at that site where species may not be thriving so much, and that could reflect that at that location there might be some contaminants present in the water. I'm going to talk about these samplers a little bit more throughout my presentation, and how we can also look at observations like this, along with measuring for the contaminants to understand impacts of contaminants in our estuaries and bays. So why do we care about contaminants in our estuaries and bays? So our bays and estuaries are much more than just scenic locations. They're really vibrant ecosystems, and they support things like tourism, fishing, recreation, and community well-being. But they also hold significant ecological, social, cultural, and economic value. So it makes them some of our most treasured natural assets. However, these ecosystems are facing increasing pressure from things like urbanisation, population growth, and climate change. And all these factors are also often contribute to contaminant pollution. And so when contaminants enter our estuaries and bays, they can degrade water quality, they can harm marine life, and they can impact on all those values that these areas have. So to safeguard these systems, it's really essential that we understand where contaminants might come from, how they travel there, and the risks that they might present. And so that's where our Exploring Unseen Threat program comes in. So this initiative focuses on monitoring surface waters for contaminants at multiple estuary sites across our 2 bays. And we're screening for over 40,000 contaminants. And this is the first time this sort of amount of contaminants have ever been screened for. Our sampling takes place 3 times a year, and it will run over a 3-year period. And we're just sort of finishing our first year. And this will enable us to identify both spatial and temporal trends in contaminant occurrence. Some of the monitoring rounds will also include some toxicological assessments. So this is where we look at potential impacts to flora and fauna. So we'll sort of end up with some data on the occurrence of contaminants in these systems, and also whether they're potentially having an effect. And by collecting this information, what the project aims to do is establish a baseline of contaminants of concern in both Port Phillip and Western Port estuaries and within the bay. And this is a really important step towards more informed management and the long-term protection of these ecosystems. Now, how do we do this sampling and monitoring? So as I mentioned, we're focusing on surface waters, and what we're using are these special samplers called passive samplers, and you can see them in these little pictures here. And what we're doing is we're working with volunteers to deploy these samplers out into our estuaries and bays. The samplers go out for around 1 month, and during that time they accumulate the contaminants onto them from the water. After that period, our volunteers go back out and retrieve them. They send, or we then go and pick them up from them, and they're taken to our analytical labs, which is the National Measurement Institute in Port Melbourne. And that's where the scientists then extract the contaminants off them and screen for their presence. And we're using 2 different screening approaches. One called a targeted approach, and this is where we have a list of around 450 contaminants that we've developed over many, many years that we potentially think might be present. So we compare against them. And then we have this non-targeted screening. So this is where we compare these spectra, which are shown here in the slide, to these libraries of spectra for 40,000 contaminants. And that's a lot more complicated and produces a lot of data, but it gives us a broader understanding of contaminant presence. So what kind of data do we get from this work? So the approach provides presence-absence data on the types of contaminants found in our estuaries and bays. And the data that I'm showing here is from our first round of sampling, which was done December last year to January this year. And this is the results from that targeted screening. So we screened for 450 contaminants, and we detected 104 across our sites. The detected contaminants were grouped from a range of categories of contaminants, which are shown down below there in the water. What we found were pesticides were the most prevalent of the chemicals or chemical contaminants that we detected. So they made up 86% of all detections, with herbicides being the most common, followed by our fungicides and insecticides. But we also detected some pharmaceuticals, industrial compounds, and some synergists. So they're things that work with other chemicals. One thing with these detections, we're not saying that pesticides are the most common overall detected. The targeted screening we have is very focused on pesticides. So many of the chemicals making up that 450 that we look at are pesticides. As we undertake that non-targeted screening, we'll be broadening out to look at contaminants from other wider groups. So we'll hopefully uncover a wider diversity of things that might be occurring in these systems. We also gather information on spatial differences in contaminant numbers across the different estuaries. And this map is just showing the numbers of contaminants that we found at our different estuary sites in that first round. So we found anything from down near sort of 7 or 8 contaminants all the way through to low 30s at any one site. Now, when we look at these numbers of contaminants and where they're occurring, we can start to look at potential sources of the contaminants. And we can also identify catchments where maybe we want to go and do further work because we're seeing a lot of different things occurring in them. So, for example, we've done some initial work on this data where we've looked at the relationship between land use and the presence of contaminants. And so what we've sort of found is that there's several sites where there was really high contaminant counts, and these were linked to catchments that were dominated by intensive agriculture or intensive industrial activities. And in contrast, we then had some catchments which are characterised primarily by things like rural living or residential areas, and these showed lower numbers of contaminants. So I just want to sort of sum up why this project is really important. And, despite there being quite a bit of research that's done on contaminant risks in our estuaries and bays, there are still important knowledge gaps that remain. And this program is really starting to improve our monitoring in these systems and helping address those knowledge gaps. We're still in the very early stages. As I said, we've just finished 1 year. So we've just got our third round of samplers gone out just recently. We are developing a baseline of contaminant presence and a limited understanding of impact. And as we move forward, things in the future we'll be able to direct is where we might want to now go and understand the concentrations of contaminants so we can really inform risk assessment better. The initial findings highlight that there are a variety of contaminants, and that ongoing non-target screening will broaden our understanding of the types of contaminants that are of greatest concern. The research is really vital as contaminants arise from our everyday activities and they can affect the values of our estuaries and bays. So understanding where and how they're coming in and where they're occurring, that'll help us develop targeted management strategies. And the last important thing with this is like building strong partnerships is really essential for projects like this to ensure that our findings are used by the different stakeholders. So that's anywhere from community through to government and industry. Our volunteer participation is really key to this project. It helps us to do more sampling because it reduces the costs of the program, but it also provides that opportunity for community to play a role in protecting these ecosystems. So I hope I've given you a little snapshot into our project. I'd like to thank you all for listening. If you do want to get involved, you can use the QR code or head to our website and you can sign up, and then you can participate in sampling events in your local estuary. You can also visit our website and there's reports and recordings of seminars we've given on the results of the project, so you can go and get them from there, or even check out some of the training material which would inform you on what's involved if you want to participate. But yeah, thanks guys.
Everyone's everyone's clapping at home, Jackie. I can hear it from where I am. Can you hear me quite okay?
Yeah.
Good. I had to put on my helicopter pilot headphones. Apparently, there's some reverb coming through. Uh, yeah, thanks for, I guess, what's like just scratching the surface of what we sort of know. We've got a few questions in and around. There's one here about, is there any possibility of extending the program to Geelong and the Ballerine?
We do go as far as Hovels Creek at the moment, which is sort of Lara and comes into the top of Corio Bay. We haven't moved further down the coast at this point. It's more the main estuaries that are entering Port Phillip Bay.
Yeah. But as you're saying, so if community are interested in being
Yeah,
involved,
as part of the project, we're sort of a little bit limited to where the Port Phillip Bay fund. So this is funded through the Port Phillip Bay Fund.
yep.
So we're a little bit limited by where that allows us to do work. We are looking at trying to expand the program by applying for some more funding, which would let us look at a few contaminants that we can't look at in this because they're really particular and the way they're analysed. But at this stage, it'll probably still stay in Western Port and within the Port Phillip Bay areas.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Look, there's a few extra questions here. Actually, there's one I'll go to, and then the others, if you've got a chance, it'd be great if you could have a crack at answering them. Well, actually, probably while I'm talking, you can listen to Joel, and then when I'm talking, you can answer the question. How do you know that your sampling medium is effective for all the different pollutants, especially as the samplers are left for so long? The pollutants must vary with time.
Yes, so pollutants do vary with time, and that's partly why we use passive samplers because they go out for that 4-week period. And so they're able to capture that sporadic kind of pollutions. That's one real bonus of them, rather than if you take a grab sample, it's just at that point in time. The samplers can absorb to a certain point and then lose some, and that's why it's more presence absence. Rather than being able to tell a concentration of the contaminants in the water. They won't target every single contaminant. They are targeting things that are in the bioavailable form. And that's really important because anything that's bound up is sort of it's less likely to impact our biota in the water, but things that are bioavailable can therefore be taken up and exposed to biota and cause impacts.
Yeah, great. Look, we're going to move on to Joel. There are a couple of questions there for you. Thank you so much for that, Jackie. And For those that are listening or have just sort of checked in, we're going to go through. There should be some time at the end for questions for both people if you would like. Um, but we'll try and get through them as we can. And so, Joel, I've also had the pleasure of knowing for quite some time. And given that I've traveled across the Nullarbor with him in his car, I could tell you quite a few stories about Joel. But he studied his PhD in Victoria on Black Brim, and I remember going to Joel's, I think it was the final speech talk for your PhD, and just learned a lot about how an estuary actually works. I was super impressed with the amount of research, and given you took some time to get it done, no surprise there was so much research done there. But Joel's actually joining us from Townsville Airport. I believe he's sitting outside, but if you do hear some taxis and some honking and some announcements, that's the reason why. And today we're going well away from the estuaries that we have now into, I guess, the area that we don't get to visit too often as scuba divers, the mesotrophic reefs. I'll hand it over to you, Joel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Um, share my screen. Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's great to see 86 people online. It's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, as Kate mentioned, I'm hopefully going to introduce you to a part of the ocean that you may or may not have visited before. It's probably one of my personal favorite parts of the ocean, and hopefully by the end of the talk, you'll understand why. But first, I thought I'd better cover who am I. My technical title is I'm a senior lecturer in quantitative marine ecology at IMAS UTAS, but the unofficial title is probably more of a fish nerd. I like counting fish and then using some statistics to understand why the fish are living where they're living and how that's changing through time. I grew up on the Mornington Peninsula, so I'm a Victorian. I grew up diving all over the peninsula in the heads. I completed my undergraduate degree with honours down at Deakin University in Warrnambool before making the move to the Big Smoke and, as Kade said, completing my PhD at the University of Melbourne, where I did a lot of work down the Gippsland Lakes all the way through to Mallacoota. And then since then, I've had various roles at such as Murdoch University in Fremantle and the New South Wales Department of Fisheries. So, so what is mesophotic? So you've heard this term mesophotic now. It probably doesn't mean anything to you, but meso is referring to mid and photic is referring to light, and it's describing the part of the ocean where light is limited. And we're seeing a transition in our rocky reefs from algae and kelp dominated reefs, which you're probably more familiar with when you're snorkeling and diving, to more sessile and vertebrate dominated reefs. And these are generally occurring in depths around 30 to about 150 meters of depth. But this varies depending on geography and light availability and water quality and whatnot. You probably are more familiar, or you may refer to them as sponge gardens. Anyone who's done any diving in the Port Phillip Heads, there's some amazing sponge gardens. This is an example of one of these mesophotic reefs from Tasmania. I took this photo. It's about exactly 40 meters depth. There's a lot happening in this photo, but I think it's just a really good demonstration of these mesophotic reefs or sponge gardens, or I'm starting to call them the cold Victorian or Tasmanian coral reefs that rival the Great Barrier Reef. And there is a lot happening in this photo. We've got lots of soft corals. These big orange sea whips are a type of octocoral. There's sponges, and you can even see that there's about 3 or 4 strands of kelp or eclonia that is still growing. It's not doesn't look very healthy, but it's still growing in 40 meters of depth. And then off to the side here, we have a infamous Centrostephanus or long-spined sea urchin, which is one of the range extending species, which is actually causing a bit of harm in eastern Victoria and Tasmania. And you can actually see on this wall here where it's actually gone along and it's actually eaten all the sponges off the wall. So why mesophotic reefs? Why should we care? What's so interesting? If they're out of sight, they're out of mind. Well, the actual physical spatial coverage of mesophotic reefs is actually much larger than shallow reefs. So the area of 30 to 150 meters depth is obviously a lot larger than sort of less than 30 meters depth. And if you enjoy seafood, this is a very rough number, but approximately 70% of Australia's fisheries are operating in catching fish and crayfish at mesophotic depths. And there's plenty of research out now there that's demonstrated that this is a unique functioning ecosystem And there's ideas that have been thrown out there that these deeper reefs are actually acting as refugia for climate change. So when the shallows are getting too warm, fish are moving down into these mesophotic depths. Now, this is still a very hot topic, excuse the pun. It's much debated. There's growing evidence that these mesophotic reefs are also undergoing and experiencing warming waters and climate change. And they're also important because back in 2018, the Australian government announced a network of Australian marine parks all around Australia, and many of these marine parks start at the 3 nautical miles, so that's the state limit. So state waters go out to 3 nautical mile, and then these Australian marine parks extend out over the continental shelf and quite often into the deep abyss, but they are covering and protecting many mesophotic reefs around Australia. So some of us might not be able to dive. Most of us might not be able to dive beyond 30 meters. There are some keen rebreather mixed gas divers who go down to 100, 150 meters. No surprises, we're not allowed to do that for work. So we actually use cameras and robots to collect imagery to help us count the fish. And on the left-hand side here is probably our most common and most standardized method for sampling at these depths. This is called a baited remote underwater video. This is basically a metal frame with 2 cameras, and I've just cut off there's actually this end of this pole, there's a bag of bait where there's 1 kilo of pilchards, and that draws the fish in front of the cameras. And then we count the fish. And if we collect enough samples across a large enough area, across various habitats and habitat types and structures and depths, we can get an idea of what fish are living where. And if we repeat this through time, then we can track differences. So it's very similar. You're probably very familiar with the Reef Life Survey, which is a standardized approach for sampling shallow reefs. This is probably our version of sampling, a standardized method for sampling the deeper reefs. Then on the right-hand side here, we have an underwater drone or an underwater robot, or scientific terms are a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV. And so just like a drone that you're familiar with flying in the sky, I have a remote control on the boat that's connected to a laptop, and I can pilot this across the sea floor, and it collects imagery, and we can bring all this imagery back to the lab, and then we can sit there and count the fish and relate the fish that we see to the habitat that we see. So we've done lots of work now on these mesophotic reefs, and we've done comparisons such as comparing to the shallow reefs to the mesophotic reefs. And what we found is that there are noticeable differences, and that these mesophotic reefs are unique. However, we are seeing a lot of the shallow reefs. So this is the common Mado, which if anyone's dived in East Victoria or New South Wales, they're probably very, very familiar with Mado. In fact, they're even moving down to Tasmania now. Everyone's moving down to Tasmania, including the Mado. But it's more commonly associated with shallow reefs, and we're seeing these Mado now in 100, 120 meters depth. So we're seeing a lot of these shallow water species occupying these deeper reefs. So I do have to apologise. I just got back from a mesophotic reef survey at Coffs Harbour, where we went out. We're working with the Gumbungia Rangers, the Sea Rangers, on our marine parks branch, and they were helping us do some bruvs. And I took all these highlight videos from the bruvs and ROV. But as Kade mentioned, I'm in Townsville, and I left the hard drive in Hobart. But I did manage to find this clip. That hopefully work, that looks demonstrate some of the footage that we collect. What you can see here is there's a snapper feeding on the bait. We can see some Venus tuskfish. There's a pearl perch up here. As I said, we've got these Mados. This is in about 60 meters depth. But you can see there's a really vibrant fish life. What we actually found, which was really interesting, that so fish like snapper, which are really popular recreationally targeted species. If anyone in the audience who's a keen fisher and might struggle to catch these snapper at a legal size, what we found is that there were more fish above the minimum legal length in these deeper reefs compared to the shallower reefs. So maybe instead of being a climate refugia, that maybe they are an important refugia for fishery targeted species. Got another highlights reel. This is from some earlier work that I did off Port Stephens in the Hunter Marine Park. This was a few years ago. We actually used blue light to minimize the impact on fish assemblages. So that's why it's looking blue. but and now there's a white light. You can see this is the eastern rock lobster here. We see lots of leather jackets, again, more snapper. You can see the habitat here. These are all soft corals and sponges. Lots of these ocean leather jackets, or sorry, these are velvet leather jackets, sorry. We do also see lots of ocean leather jackets. You see the eastern wira here. And this was a nice surprise. This was about a 3.8 meter male grey nurse shark, which is critically endangered species. And so we've actually seen quite a few of these grey nurse sharks living and inhabiting these deeper reefs. A little bit shallower now. This is in about 40, 50 meters depth. So we're seeing lots of these yellowtail scad. Anyone who's a fisher may use them as bait. And then here are the ocean leather jackets. There's some nanny guys. So the ocean leather jackets and the nanny guy, which are these red fish in the background, these are fish that are more mesophotic specialist. And here's a bit of a highlight here. This is a 1.8 meter baby shark, a baby white shark that scared the living daylights out of me when I was watching it back in the lab, and it came swimming at the camera at 1,000,000 miles an hour. We estimate that shark's probably only a few months old. It probably was birthed off the continental shelf, and it's on its way into the shallower waters of Port Stephens, where it will live and feed off fish that live in the surf zone. Lots of little baby wobbegongs, some more velvet and ocean leather jackets. As you can see, really vibrant habitat and really vibrant fish assemblage. So it is a pretty special part of the world. And if anyone gets a chance to dive on these reefs, I do highly recommend it, with the appropriate training and equipment, of course. And then so that was all baited remote underwater video, and this is what the ROV footage looks like. Oop, it's just frozen on me. Let's try that one again. There we go. Rough floor. This one doesn't. Let's try it again. Okay, I can just flick through it and get little snippets. Oh, here we go. Now it's working. So lots of brim. This is what I call a fish bowl here. This is about 40 meters of depth. Lots of old wives, lots of red morwong, lots of stripies. Just amazing fish life. And this is actually a natural urchin barren in New South Wales. So this is where the Centrostephanus has gone through. We've pretty much eaten everything on the rocks, and that's why those rocks are looking bare. And in this part of the world, that's a naturally occurring phenomenon. Now we're down into 85 meters, where there's no kelp living at these depths, and now we're seeing all these sea whips. These are all octocorals and sponges on low relief reef. In fact, this was a seabed of sea whips that was coming out of the soft sediment. So there's likely a layer of reef underneath with some soft sediment, and these sea whips are growing through. And then we see these large boulder reefs. There's oh, now I've forgotten, I've been put on the spot. What sort of it's a species of boarfish, and I can't remember what boarfish it is. It's not the long snout boarfish, but it's another one of the boarfish species. And you can see these reefs are just covered in all sorts of corals and sponges. Down to 105 meters. This is about the limitation of our ROV, because it is a very small and cost-effective ROV, I'll call it. I call it the IKEA of ROV because it comes flat packed and you have to build it yourself, but it makes it affordable and easy to use. So what now, or what research am I working on now? The main focus of my research is trying to understand how climate change, and particularly marine heat waves, are impacting these mesophotic depths. I've teamed up with some oceanographers from the University of New South Wales, and they have evidence that these marine heat waves are going well beyond 200 meters of depth. So while many thought that these deeper reefs might have provided refuge here from warming waters, there's growing evidence that these marine heat waves that the southeast corner of Australia has been experiencing is actually penetrating quite deep. In fact, that's what brings me to Townsville. I'm up here to look at doing some marine heat wave experiments with the Australian Institute of Marine Science. But the majority of the focus of our research is around those Australian marine parks, and trying to prepare the marine park managers to better understand how climate change is impacting these deeper reefs that are often out of sight, out of mind. So thank you very much for listening. There's my email address. I'm happy to take any emails or questions now. I've done some shameless plugs with some social media. I'm a bit slow on the social media, so please excuse me if it takes me a day or two to get back to you, but please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. So hopefully I've introduced you to the wonderful world of mesophotic reefs, aka sponge gardens, aka the Great Southern Reef's coral reef, which is far better than the Great Barrier Reef.
Nice. And you're saying that sitting at the Townsville airport.
Yeah, I know.
You're a brave man,
No,
Joel.
I was gonna say no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Those
Coming for you.
pretty reef fish.
Oh,
Yeah,
that baby wobbegong's probably the cutest thing I've seen for a long time. That was
yeah,
amazing.
cool.
Yeah. Um, I've got questions for you, but I'll save them to the end. So there's one here from anonymous attendee. Is the fish counting performed by AI, or is this still something that's like down the track in the future?
It's getting there. Yeah, so we've on another project we've teamed up with some researchers from Griffith University who are in the process of developing an AI model. So it's getting there for the common species. It's fairly easy, like the snapper. They've got a model to count the snapper. But I must admit, at the moment, it is still manual counting. To be honest, it's like my meditation is counting those fish. So I actually quite enjoy it. So I hope AI doesn't completely take over.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're going to need to ground truth
Yeah,
some of that at some
yeah,
stage,
yeah,
particularly for
exactly.
the interesting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you've got any more questions, like Joel had his email there, and we can pop that in the chat. But feel free to pop them in. Joel will probably do his best before he shoots off, given that he's at the airport.
still
I'm
got a couple of hours.
due in a couple of hours. All right, you can relax and have a chat then. What we'll do is I'm going to talk now, and then we will probably wrap up at about 7:30. But we're going to stay on and have a bit of a catch up because it's been a while. You are free to leave at 7:30, but we're not going to switch anything off. And you feel free to ask questions after that time. So I will stop rabbiting on and go to my slide. All right, so here some of the shots from this is basically a wrap up of the 2024 Great Victorian Fish Count. So thank you to everyone that's listening, that's participated, and for those of you that aren't, haven't participated before, it will be a bit of an introduction as to what goes on. Unfortunately, this year we don't have the t-shirts that you can see in this photo. Um, Funding didn't come through. It's been tough for, I guess, quite a few not-for-profits, and I guess it's also been tough for a lot of government staff. There's been quite a lot of cuts, and there hasn't been much funding available to help support that this year. We make the design freely available, and you will see what the design is soon. So if you want, you can print it on whatever you like. So if it's a coffee mug, if it's a shirt, tea towel, whatever suits your fancy, feel free to go ahead. My favorite photo I think I've ever seen during the Great Victorian Fish Count is on this slide. It is the one of that taken by Elodie Compress of her partner Matt, pointing to the wrong fish. She set him up, got him into position, said, "Yep, beautiful, beautiful. Point to this fish," and it's almost like you're asking the fish, "Is this you?" Um, and he got the fish wrong. But other than that, it is definitely my favorite shot and sort of encapsulates what's going on with the Great Victorian Fish Count. So. How it's done, for those that have done it before, you'll be familiar with this picture, and I can even hold up. I've got a slate here that's printed onto an underwater slate. You have a pencil, you swim around and tick off the fish as you see them. The numbers are quite broad, so 1 to 5, 6 to 20, and 20 plus. And it's not every single fish you see. We do have a space at the bottom of the slate. Unfortunately, this one doesn't have a picture on it where you can write fish that aren't on the slate if you know what they are. But it's a way of keeping track of some of the fish that we have here in Victoria. They're all chosen for various reasons, mostly because of they're reef associated or, they tend to stay close to home. And they're the ones that are more likely to be impacted by any disturbance at your local dive sites. So, what did we find in 2024? We had people out having fun. We've got most of the surveys being done. Unfortunately, that doesn't come up quite clearly. We're done by scuba. With a few snorkelers, we're noticing the number of snorkelers is increasing over time, which is great. I think it's a lot more accessible for people to jump in the water snorkeling, but it can also impact the results given that you see a lot different things when you're floating along the surface than you do when you're underneath. And always, as always, we've only got 5% of our state protected as marine protected areas, but quite a large percentage, I think it's about 15% of the surveys are done in marine protected areas. So it goes to show how heavily used these are by the recreational sort of snorkelers and divers, and people are in there, I guess, looking for a safe place to go, but also aware of how amazing the marine life is in these places. This was the slide I was meant to delete. There we go. Um, I told you I wasn't feeling too flash. So looking at the habitat, sand and mud is not a surprise. I think just about everywhere you go, you got that sand mud. But we've still got artificial reefs up there with over 50% of our surveys being done on artificial reefs. This has been slowly declining over years. I think particularly as word of the Great Southern Reef and our unique species, as you can see with all these images taken by Jane. This was at Lonsdale Wall, all on one dive. People are starting to get out and explore our reefs more and sort of start to get a better understanding of what we have on our local sort of natural reefs. But I can understand the attraction of the artificial reefs than the piers because they are a lot easier to dive on in some places. Um, We've got the vegetation that's present at most. Interesting to see that we're getting sort of seagrass at quite a few of the locations, which is probably correlates with the artificial reefs, given that a lot of the pier structures we have are over soft sediment, so you'll often find seagrass around there. But again, we've got that kelp habitat turning up in about 50%, which is more indicative of people getting out onto our natural reefs, which is great to see. And on to the fish. So the way we do this is very, I guess, simple. It's quite simple, and it's just a proportion. So for blue throat wrasse, where you see one, if something was to be present in high abundance or in every single fish count that was done, it would represent one. Whereas if it was found in, God, I've absolutely butchered the explanation of this. Proportion is basically the number of surveys that the fish was seen in versus the number of surveys that were done for the Great Victorian Fish Count. So as you can see, for blue throat wrasse, being close to one, it's been quite steady over time. It is one of the more commonly seen species. It's found on our natural reefs, but also frequently seen on our artificial reefs too. We've got zebrafish there, not seen as frequently, but as you can see, reasonably stable proportion, meaning that most, over 60% of the time, or 60% of the time, people are going out there seeing zebrafish at their sites. Herring kale, which was the feature fish for this year, again, not seen as frequently, but still seen at a reasonably consistent level over the years that we've been doing the Great Victorian Fish Count. And then we've got our six-spine leatherjacket. What we've noticed here is it is starting to show it's almost like a slight decline over time, which is part of what doing the Great Victorian Fish Count is, to keep an eye on these things. And then what we have at our use, which is amazing, and Joel even mentioned it earlier in his talk, is the data from Reef Life Survey. So I've done the same thing with Reef Life Survey. The data can be looked at many different ways, and Joel's probably face palming himself saying, "What are you doing just using proportions?" But I'll tell you, I was crook. I did it today. This is the same. So it's the amount of reef life surveys done in Victoria over the years. Um, and this is the amount of surveys that six spine leather jackets were seen in, divided by the amount of surveys that were done over that time. And what you'll see there is they're not cited as frequently, but they have been actually almost increasing and cited at sort of quite consistent levels. So this data we will look into further. It's just an initial grasp, but the idea is the fish count is almost the canary in the coal mine, and then we have access to Reef Life Survey data to look deeper into some of these trends to see what's happening with the data. The horseshoe leather jacket, which is going to be our feature species for this year. So this is from our data from the Great Victorian Fish Count. Again, it's another species we've noticed there's been this sort of slight decline over time. The beauty of the fish count is that it's been going for a long time at the same time over multiple years. So it allows to, smooth out these fluctuations that you'll see in data, particularly around fish, and see what the longer term patterns are. Again, I had a quick look at the Reef Life Survey data here. The data's been quite steady up until about 2020. but I think that's more an artifact of quite a few surveys were done in the early days, like 45 to 380 surveys. So a lot of surveys there and a lot of different habitats where after 2020, the number of surveys, the maximum done was at just about 30, where you've got these drops where there's only 12 and 4 where they weren't seen at all. So again, this requires looking into it a bit further. You can see there's been quite a spike in 24 and it's maintaining in 25, but not many surveys are being done. And again, it's a matter of looking at that into that data a little bit further, but the ball is rolling on this due to the work that everyone's been doing by completing the Great Victorian Fish Count. So to go on to our horseshoe leather jacket, which is the feature fish for this year. This is apparently where it's found, and as I put this together, this is from the Atlas of Living Australia. I saw that one dot all the way up around Sydney, and I'm curious to investigate where that data's actually come from. And you can see all across that bottom part of Australia. If you check out iNaturalist, you don't actually have many sightings past Wilson's Prom. It's almost like Wilson's Prom down to Tasmania and around to WA are the main places that horseshoe leather jackets are sighted. What we know about them, and so again, this is all information coming from the Atlas of Living Australia. A fair chunk of that comes from all of you doing the Great Victorian Fish Count. As you can see, iNaturalist Records provides a lot. If you're not familiar with iNaturalist, I recommend you become familiar with iNaturalist, particularly for your underwater photos when you're trying to work out what the hell that beautiful thing was you took an image of. And you can see Reef Life Survey comes in with 900, and then the you know the third most data provider is the Great Victorian Fish Count, which is done by everyone in here. So thank you for that. It's really helping paint a picture of what we have in Victoria. So to go on to what we know about horseshoe leather jackets. The easiest thing would be to say we don't know much at all. I did a bit of a literature search today to see what we know, and it's probably easy to talk about what we don't know. So we don't know how old they are. We don't know the age at which they mature, so that's the age at which they become sexually reproductive. We've got a max length of 60 centimeters, which is actually quite big. I didn't realize they got that big. Um, and we know that the males and the females are different. As in quite a lot of fish, the males are the show-offs. They have the big, bright, bold colors to attract the females. And the females tend to be a darker color. The thing I love about this photo is there's a nudibranch underneath, but don't let me get distracted. One of the things that we know, or the way that we actually have learnt most about horseshoe leather jacket is through lobster pots. Apparently, they're really good at getting trapped in lobster pots. And so some opportunistic sampling has been done over time to look at what their diet is and also check out their teeth. It's a bit gruesome, isn't it? So I've pulled this from the paper. I'm not going to read the paper title out to you, but you can see what it is. They are the teeth of the leather jacket. So part of the study was they looked at the gut contents and found it was full of sponges, bryozoans, brown algae, red algae, crustaceans, polychaetes, and basically like little things you can pick off. And they're saying the teeth are actually sort of designed, they're good for algal grazing and good for picking stuff off. There's what you might notice. Ah, didn't it work? What you might notice, yeah, I screwed up the transition. The Nodolabrus tetricus, prize for the first person to write down what a Nodolabrus tetricus is. I can't monitor the chat at the moment, but I'm sure someone's in there. So look at those scary teeth. It's actually a blue throat wrasse. I had never paid close attention or ever really got close to them. But yeah, that's the teeth of the blue throat wrasse, and they found that its diet was mostly mollusks and snails, so basically just picking stuff up and crushing it off the bottom. So what we know about horseshoe leather jackets, we know from them being silly enough to get caught in lobster pots. And so the final thing for me is to promote the design that we've got for this year. I'm getting mine printed on a pink background, but as we said, the design's open to everyone. Choose your color, choose your thing that you want to get it put on. If you want to find out more about the Great Victorian Fish Count, please get in touch with us through the Reef Watch page. There's an email there, and we will shortly have all the stores and the clubs that are doing the Great Victorian Fish Count. One of the things that for an insurance purpose is that we need to ensure that there's either a snorkel instructor or someone as dive master or an instructor that runs the fish count so that they're covered for insurance sakes. Oh, the joy of occupational health and safety. Now, I am going to disappear and see what we've got. There are no questions for me, which is great. And we've got about 4 minutes left. So I'll invite Joel and Jackie back. And there are no open questions, so I can have a look at my notes. And my first question was going to be for you, Joel. What sort of baseline information do we have about these habitats? Like, is this the first time we're doing it, or have we got trawl information, commercial fishery information? Like, what are you working on to sort of compare, or are you just starting to put the picture together?
It's a very good point. The quick answer is we're just starting to put the picture together. So as we know, we've been fishing for a long time. Climate change has been around for a long time. So we don't know what these reefs would have looked like prior to human impact. So what we're trying to do now, and this is what we're doing at Parks Australia, is to really establish a baseline. So if we can get, again, it's going back to having that enough samples across a large enough area, it can give us a baseline so that when we can come back, we can, a bit like the data that you showed, so we can, unfortunately, we don't have 30 years at the moment, but we've got maybe 5 years of data, which is not quite enough to detect trends. But yeah.
Yeah, that long-term data set is like it's a rarity in sort of any science, I think. And so sort of having access to that to be able to sort of pick it apart
Yeah.
is a luxury. And I wish I had all day and many days to do it. And I guess I could ask the same question of you, Jackie, when it comes to sort of baseline condition and what's been found in these places. Do we have any idea? Has someone done sort of for any of the chemicals that you're finding? Do we have an idea?
There's been a lot of sporadic work done on contaminants, and I suppose because it's quite an expensive sort of thing to look at, that's why it's been like that. So there's no ongoing monitoring or anything. So that baseline's hard to have, and because we get new chemicals developed every year, the list just keeps expanding on them, and that. So I think it's sort of a never-ending thing looking at contaminants and understanding what's there and whether it's having impacts. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that with stuff being created all the time. And I had a really good question, which just goes to show where my head's at. The Great Victorian Fish Count starts on the 15th of November and runs through to the 14th of December. Some groups find that the weather window doesn't work for them in that they plan the event and then have to do it later. That's fine. And then we're going to finish up in a minute, and there's one bit of information that I forgot to tell you is that we don't actually know much about the reproductive cycle, like reproduction in horseshoe leather jackets, but we do for the velvet leather jacket, which Joel showed me, and it was amazing. So apparently they have very small testes, which means that they pair up, and apparently they also nest. Now, I didn't realize nesting was a thing in marine fish. We've had Mark Norman on talking about how scalyfin create like I guess it is a nest. Like they have a cave that they um, look after and get things in. So I guess that's more a challenge for people out there taking photos. Try and find a horseshoe leather jacket nest or nesting behavior. Be fascinating to know because we actually don't know how they reproduce and how their larvae disperses. Now, we've got a question here that's about black bream. So what I'm going to do is wrap it up right now, and I'm going to have to find my sheet so I remember all the things that I need to say in that. So thank you for everyone who supports us, whether that's, they're a member, they're a donor, or you just get out and do some of the events that we put on or that your local dive clubs put on or your local community groups put on. It's part of VMPA is supporting and working with community, and we have been for 70 years, and we plan to do it for another 70 years, if not more. the effort that you put in and to help us sort of learn these things and unstitch some of these mysteries is amazing. I'm very appreciative. Look, and I hope you've had as much fun as I did, although I'm a little bit disjointed, so I hope the other guests were nice and smooth for you. I'm looking forward to seeing your happy snaps from the Great Victorian Fish Count, and when I get better, I hope to see you near the sea soon.